This is in regards to the PC version. To answer your question, Charles, we are still catching up in terms of features for the Mac version. We want to bring that up to speed with our PC product, but I specialize on our PC product. So, okay. Okay, we have a lot of people from Europe hanging out in this video today. So I see like, hey, greetings from Holland, greetings from the Netherlands, and things like that. Yeah. So also, yeah, we're located on the West Coast, just on BC, British Columbia, Canada. So if you are from somewhere else in the world that isn't close to us, there you go. Belize, Colombia, Ireland, Brazil. Thank you for tuning in. Because obviously there's a bit of a time difference for people. And yeah, that's so cool that you participate. Thank you. Okay, let's get started. If you can reserve your questions for the Q&A panel, that would be awesome so that I can answer questions as we go. And okay. So no, Charles, just to answer your question, ACDSee Photo Studio 6 is a bit older, and it's not that the seminar wouldn't work for you, it's just that the features in it are very different. But to not waste your time, we're going to be focusing on specifically layered editing. And I actually I didn't work at ACDSee when Photo Studio 6 was a program that was available, so my guess is that they're probably quite a bit different in terms of the version history. So I guess maybe not, but obviously feel free to stick around and see what the new product is capable if that's what you're into. Okay, Jim, we will answer your question. Okay. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about. So, like I said, this is one of our users, or one of our workshop attendees suggested that they wanted to understand masking a little bit better. Masking is something that's only possible in our layered editor. So that's ACDSee Photo Studio Ultimate 2020. And we're going to be basically talking about how to place images on top of one another and then get accurate selections and then mask based off of those selections. So let's get into it, basically. Before I do so, though, I'll just a reminder, just a quick breakdown of what I like to do here is because this workshop is quite in depth, I'm only going to be answering questions that pertain to what we're talking about at the time. And if you have questions, of course, I'd like to answer them. There might be some things that come up that I don't know the answers to in terms of your questions. So please shoot me an email and I get back to everybody as soon as I can. Matt just asked the question I was just about to answer, and that is, if you want to rewatch this, tomorrow or Thursday, I will have this up on our YouTube page. Because we record all these and then we just produce them, put them on our YouTube page so people can rewatch them. Yeah. So yeah, that's definitely what we're going to be talking about. So let's just get into it. I'm going to open up this image here. I just have this doc image. And so we're going to break this into a couple of different steps. So basically, let's go over the basics of how a mask interacts. Then let's go over to how to make selections. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be isolating this Russian fighter jet here, and then we're going to be placing it over top of another background. And then I'll also show you how to make that selection manually. So using methods like the wand, the brush selection tool, and the polygonal selection tool. And then I'll also show you automatic methods, with this image here of this flamingo using pixel targeting, which is a really useful tool as well. But before we do that, let's go over the basics. So I'm going to open up this image in edit mode here, which is just of a doc. So doc image, whoop-de-doo. what happens if I really don't like the background in this image? In this case, this area right here. We'll highlight it to give you an idea. I love the dock. I think it's really beautiful sort of movement in it. I like how the water plays in the background, but I really don't like this sort of weird sort of background here with the pardon me, the sort of the hotel and things like that. So I want to do is basically I actually want to take this section out, and I want to place a new background in that area. And the way I'm going to do that, okay, is I'm going to use masks. So before we start, let's drag our image, in this case, that we want to place over top of this background section onto our layer panel, which is our layer panels just on the right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this image from our film strip, and I'm going to drag it on to our layer panel right here. And what that does is it places a second image on our layer panel. And as you can see, the aspect ratio, the size, okay, of this image is slightly different from that of our base image right there. When we add another image, it's asking us to commit or discard our image, which essentially asks us to correctly place this image. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually change the blending mode of this image so I can better see the background as I'm basically placing it over top, because we want it to be accurately placed before we go about masking anything away from the image. So I'm just going to go to normal, and I'll just multiply for the sake of this. And what I'm going to want to do is place this image in such a way, let's do like that big, say, so that we can get rid of this background with the hotel. So I'm going to place it just below that, about there. Let's say about there. And I'll just go into multiply, and I'll change it back to normal so that we see everything fully. And I'll commit this layer. Now, we have two images on our layer panel. One image is layer 2, which we placed just over top of our layer 1 image here. And as you can see, with this image, it's taking visual precedence of our layer beneath it. So when a layer is located on top of the layer panel, what this indicates is that basically we're seeing that layer first, okay? So if I pull this layer down, I will see layer 1 predominantly, and I won't see layer 2. There's ways to interact with this, one of which is masking, which is the topic of our conversation. We're going to be talking about that a little bit later. But if I wanted this image to appear in combination with the image beneath it, I could blend it. And blending it would be to use this panel right here that's located over top of the layer panel. So if I go with something like overlay, you can see that this image has been overlaid over top of the layer 1. If I go to multiply like we did previously, you can see that a different effect has been applied. There's a bunch of different blend modes, and I would suggest just playing around with them to get familiar with them. But that's one method of sort of blending images together. Another method is to obviously reduce the opacity. So as we reduce the opacity on our layer 1, or sorry, our layer 2 rather, layer 1 becomes more visible. As it's set to 0, it's clear that this image is essentially hidden, and then layer 1 is the only thing that's visible. And as we increase the opacity, you can see that that is the only thing that's visible. So layer order is really important for obviously how we're going to be interacting with masks. And this is sort of why I'm stopping to talk about it now. But what we want to do is we want to combine these images. What we want is we want this base section with the dock. But what we also want to do is add this top section with this lovely mountain range that's in the background and this beautiful sun that we see. I want to sort of take both halves of their images that we like. I don't want the fisherman here. I don't want the water. So what we need to do is we need to mask this image. Let's just add a mask to start, okay? And that's going to show you some things. Ronnie asked, how do you show the film strip? Well, if you go to Panes, I believe it's right there, film strip. Film strip only shows you images that are in your folder. So depending on how many images are in your folder, it may show more. I made a sort of a custom folder for this workshop. So what I want to do is I want to add a mask to this layer 2 here. So to add a mask, I'm going to click on the layer 2, have it highlighted. You know it's slightly a little bit lighter gray than the layer beneath it. And I'm just going to click this button right here, which is Add Layer Mask. So with the mask added, you're going to notice that there's this little white box that appears to the right of our image. Now, what this does is this allows us to mask out or in parts of this image. So that probably doesn't make a lot of sense right now, but it will very momentarily. Masks are bimodal in terms of their color. Okay. So what I mean by bimodal is white. Okay, means that part of that image is turned on, and black means that that image is turned off. So if I take this mask and I invert it, it shows nothing because this entire image has been turned off using the mask. You see that this image is unhidden, so the eye still shows that it is within view. And we see that layer 2 is still on top in terms of layer order. So it means that this image is being produced or presented to us first. But this mask indicates that the whole image has been turned off from view. So what we want to do is we want to use either a selection or brush strokes, or using like a rectangle selection tool or something like that to show parts of our image here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to actually first, before we make a rectangular selection, let's just play with this mask. Let's get a better understanding of this. So I'm going to click the brush tool right here, okay? And I'm going to indicate the difference between brushing, I guess white in this case, on our mask and on a base layer. Let's go to the base layer first. So I have the brush selection active, and I have white selected as the foreground color. If I just brush white on here, oops, what's going on here? Opacity set, normal. Oh yes, that's right. Okay, let's do this. I realize I'm looking at the wrong image. There we go. That's better. Okay. So if I brush white, okay, onto this image, layer 2, I am actually actively ruining this image. I am making a destructive change to this image. So what we want to do in order to make this image, this layer 2, disappear or appear is we want to actually brush on our mask. I'm going to go back a couple here and get rid of those brush strokes. So let's click on our mask, which is this black box here. Okay. And let's brush white onto that section. And as you can see, that image starts to appear, right? As we are now applying that white to this mask. White means image is on and being presented, and black means image is off and is not being presented. So we're getting whole sections of this image here that are not being presented. And as we sort of brush them on, you'll start to see them appear. So somebody asked me to represent that, and that's really fair. So what I'm trying to do, and what I'm trying to illustrate to you, is I'm trying to differentiate between painting on a mask and painting on a base image, because they're not the same. When we apply a mask, we are telling the image, right? We're saying whatever is white is turned on and is visible, and whatever is black is turned off. But when we paint on a base layer, we are actually just we're brushing on white to that image, or black in the case, whatever we have in terms of our brush settings. So my point being is that when we interact with masks, right? We want to be brushing on We want to be sort of altering the state of this mask. And as you can see, okay, so what have we done? Okay, let's just clean this up a bit here. This is obviously a really rough masking job. This is not, what I want to indicate or display as a good masking job, but I'm just trying to illustrate the concepts to you. So we have an image here, right? Our layer 2, which is located above our layer 1, with the bottom portion of layer 2 being turned off so that we can see layer 1, which lies beneath it, and the top portion of layer 1 being this mountain that we wanted to take priority over. We thought, oh, well, this mountain looks good. We want to place it over top of our image here. So we're displaying that instead. So we have the top portion on and the bottom portion off. So look at some of these questions. Okay. Okay. So someone just asked, how do I add that mask to layer 2? And I'll indicate that again. So I can actually remove the mask that we have, because we could probably do a better job with the rectangle tool anyway, so it'd be good to illustrate that. But I can remove it by deleting that mask using this tool right here. And this is actually the same tool that we used to add it. I can also invert the mask. So if I wanted to do the opposite effect, if I wanted to see the water in our top image here, and the sort of hotel area that's in the background, I could do that by inverting this mask. And as you can see, so the top portion of our layer 2, okay, is now invisible, right? Because we're prioritizing the layer 1. And the bottom portion is turned on with our gentleman fishing in the lake here. Let's do this. I'm going to remove this mask, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mask this slightly differently. I'm going to use the rectangle selection tool, which is located up at the very top here. Still on our layer 2, okay? I'm just going to select the topmost portion of this image. Let's make that selection, for example. And then with that selected, we're going to mask this image. And you're going to see that it masks by adding a layer mask right down here in very much the same way, but far more precise than using the brush than we just did. So now you can see that the bottom of our image has that hard indicated line based on where the mask has been, or rather based on where our rectangle was applied. What we can then do is with our mask, okay, selected, we can sort of soften that edge by using the feathering tool, which is right here. So we can increase this, and as you can see, it's going to soften that portion down there, so it's not as hard as when we applied that mask to begin with. So just soften that up until we start to see our bridge appear. And then what we're going to do is we're going to clean up this image. So we have the mask here. It's now been softened at the base, so we can work with that a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move this layer 2 image up. Physically, I'm going to move it up on this image. So I'm going to click on the move tool, and we'll just drag this guy up further until we start to see, I think right about there is what we want. Just make it slightly bigger. I'm just going to place it right there. I'll hit commit. And what you may notice is that our image, okay, has been moved slightly up. We still have that feathering being applied to there. So there's sort of a smooth, gradual nature from our water in our foreground or in our background image to that of our foreground image. What we need to do now is, you can see that our dock, okay, here doesn't look too good. It looks like it's sort of been filtered out of view. And there's good reason for that, because we have, in this case, an image that's over top of it with a slightly feathered edge here. So there's a gradual sort of application of layer 2 over top of it. So what we want to do actually is we want to copy our layer 1, our base image, this guy right here. And we're going to make another mask, another selection that sort of selects out this portion here and then puts it on top of our layer 2 in the layer order. This is going to make more sense momentarily. I'm just going to take a step right now, just have a look at some of the questions. Okay. So Mervin asked a really good question, and that is, how do you get the true white color for the brush? So when we have a mask selected, you may notice that our brushes might, depending on what state of editing we're in, our brushes might actually be like a gray, for example. To get a true white and a true black, there's a little reset colors button that's right next to it, right there. And if we click on that, it's going to hard set our foreground and our background color. This might not make a lot of sense when we're just painting on an image. Like I could be painting yellow or a green on our image, but this absolutely makes sense when we're interacting with masks, which is what we're doing right now. We want that hard application. We can soften our application by using opacity, or we can use blend modes, but when we're making our selections or when we're masking out of our images, this makes a lot of sense to be using those hard applications. So to just reset those colors, you just simply click on that small bottom box button there. Okay. And to answer David's question, black and white are not the only colors that you can use to mask with. You can mask with grays and variational colors in between. But what you're going to see is going to happen. Let's do that, actually. I can show you. Let's use like an intermediate gray like this right here. If we have our mask selected, okay, we have our brush, and we're going to brush away portions of this image up top here by using an intermediate gray. You'll notice that it sort of does the same effect of using or brushing on with a degree of opacity. It's not as hard. You can still see a little bit of that color from this layer right here interact with the base layer. The reason why we want to be using harder colors is so that we can get a firmer application, especially for the basics of this. That would make more sense. So now I guess if we wanted to get back our layer 2, we wanted to see our layer 2 again, what we'd want to do is click on the mask. We'd want to invert our colors because, as you can see, if we look at our mask here, we have the bottom white portion with a true on indicated by white, a true off indicated by black, and a sort of intermediate indicated by this gray that we've applied here on our mask. I want to reapply a true on in that area. So I would swap my brush to white and I would brush on white in that area, and it will bring us back to that the application we had at the start. Thank you for the question, David. Okay. Richard asked, can the rectangular selection be modified after it has been set? What you can do is when we have a mask, okay? So in this case, we have a mask already with our layer 2. I can right click and I can add that mask to the selection. So if I go right click on our mask and add it, it's going to essentially reapply that selection, and then we can move it or adjust it if we want. But once the selection has been sort of placed in this case, you can't really move it along as much. I mean, you could make like a selection like this, and then I guess use the tool itself right here, the new selection box, to sort of move where it is. Alternatively, too, when we're making selections using any of the selection tools, we can then add sections, okay? We can remove selections using the subtract tool. And then we can just place a whole new selection by using the new selection tool. Again, we can move it with that as well. So the answer to the question is sort of. Okay, I'll answer some of these more of these questions, but before we get too off topic, what I wanted to do is I wanted to basically copy this bridge and place it over top of our layer 2. So let's do that. I'm going to make a selection. So let's go into our layer 2. Let's go into our bridge here. I'm just going to zoom in slightly using the zoom tools at the base because we want to make a fairly accurate selection. Let's have a look at our area here, and then let's make our selection. I think what I'm going to do is let's use the polygonal selection because this is fairly block-like in terms of its appearance. So with our layer 1, okay, selected with polygonal selection tool selected at the top here, let's just go in and select our bridge. So I'm just going to go around really quickly. Okay. I'm just going to make a polygonal selection of this bridge. The reason why I'm using polygonal selection is because I'm fairly confident I can make a better selection just by my own eye than some sort of automatic function, which we're going to be talking about later on in this video. So I'm just going to go along, selecting my bridge here, and let's say that's done because the portion of the layer that's over top of it, this guy right here, doesn't care about any of this bottom section. So we only need to make a half selection in this case. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take our layer 1, okay? I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to click duplicate. We can also duplicate by using the duplicate layer button that's right here. So we can duplicate it. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to slide this above layer 2 in the layer order. So what does that do? That means that layer 1, copy 1, okay, is taking visual precedence over layer 2 and layer 1. But I still want to see that layer 2, that sky that we've created. So let's now mask based on the selection that we've created. Okay. So with layer 1, copy 1, I'm going to go down to where that add layer mask button is. And it's going to add a mask that is informed based on our active selection, which is this red area right here. Okay. So I'm going to click that. And let's reapply layer 2 so we can actively see it. And then I'm just going to go to select and deselect to remove that selection. And if we zoom out, you can see that it exists over top of it. It needs to be cleaned up for sure. There's little sections of the edges in here that need to be taken care of with the brush tool, but that gives you a pretty good idea of how that can be applied then over top of our layer. If I wanted to add like, oh no, feathering wouldn't look good with that image because it's so tight in here. But if we wanted to clean up this section where there's that hard visual line right here, what we could do is we could click our layer 1, copy 1, and then I could go to our brush tool and I could use the, in this case, I suppose, white foreground color with a lowered opacity and a smaller brush to sort of just merge that dock in with that section. So instead of it being so hard in appearance, it now is blended in using a lowered opacity. Okay. Ronnie asks, I do not see the add layer mask button. Well, it's possible that your layer already has a mask, or it's possible that you only have one layer in your layer stack, which means you need to add a secondary layer. Yeah. Oh, okay. So Jean-Paul asked, I did not see how you confirm your selection and turn it red. This is actually a really good question. So you don't need to necessarily confirm your selection. When you make a selection, it's just active, okay? So let's just take layer 1, for example. I'm gonna make a selection like this, just a triangle, okay? And you're probably wondering like, hey, why is your overlay, your selection in this case, red? Actually in ACDSee, I think by default, the default is marching ants. So it'll look something like this. I'm not particularly fond of this method of making selections. I actually prefer a hard overlay. I think partially just because I think when it comes to selections, I'd rather just actively see what I've added or removed. And I think, I don't know, I guess it's just my preference. I find this a little bit harder to use. So how you can change that to make your overlay options look similar to mine would be go to select, overlay options, and then just use selection highlighted and click OK. And that will give you that sort of selection method versus the active marching ants selection. Now, your secondary question is, how did you confirm that selection? And I guess what you mean by that is, how did I add that to my layer panel? And all it is when you have made a selection, like I have this triangle here, all you need to do is click on your layer and then click on the add layer mask function. And it will take that layer or take that selection that you have and turn it into a mask, like that. So when we have that mask, we can do whatever we want with it. And like I said earlier, we can take this, we can reverse that step. We can take our mask, which is this, again, this polygonal shape here, and we can make that into now a selection again by right-clicking on it and going add mask to selection. And so it'll take what informed mask you've created, and then we can actually make a selection out of it. Okay, so I'm going to move in a second here. I'm going to transition to talking about an automated method of selections, which is going to be pixel targeting. But before I do so, I'd like to earnestly interact with some of more of these questions just to see, just to help people out. So let's have a look at some of them. Okay, so we covered that. So Michael asked, could you also just erase in the layer to get the same effect? Okay, so this is fundamentally a really, really important question. Okay, and so what Michael means is this. I'm gonna remove this mask from our image. I'm gonna create a duplicate of our layer one, okay? So if I had my layer one, copy one right here, and I was to select our erase function, which is this eraser here, and I'm to erase away parts of our image, oops, like this, okay? There's some issues with this. First and foremost, this is a completely destructive method of editing versus a non-destructive method of editing, which is the benefit of masking in general. So the reason why I'm masking is because I want to be able to interact and adjust these masks at any point. And you're going to see later on in this video, as we make different forms of masks, how important this is being non-destructive. If I've just simply erased this image, I can no longer get this back. This is gone forever. I can't undo portions of these. I can't return it. I have to simply go back to our layer, our original layer, and then copy it and start all over again. So the benefit is that this process of using masking versus erasing is totally non-destructive. Another thing, when we save this file, okay, when I go to File, Save As, and save this file not as a JPEG, not as a PNG, not as a TIFF, but rather as an ACDSee file, which is listed up at the top here, okay? That is a non-destructive file type. So that means, again, I can open up this image 2 months from now, a year from now, and I will still have all of that information. It'll totally be editable. And importantly, it will maintain and remember each and every mask that we've created. So that if we have a tiny incremental change to add or remove to our mask, we can do that. That's the benefit of masking versus erasing a section. So Jillian asked, why on layer one, copy one was the dock a slightly different color to that of layer one? It's actually not. We can have a look at it. So this layer and this layer are the same colors. The reason why you saw what you did, okay, is let's look at where our layer two mask bleeds out. So the reason why it appears slightly different in color to that of the original layer one is because of this this feathering that we've applied to the base of our layer. So as that feathering becomes like an incremental change at the very edge of our image here, it's going to impact the way that our image looks, or rather in comparison to the way that it looks beneath it. We have all these different layers interacting with one another. I'm going to get rid of this because it's a bit confusing. And with those layers, they're going to have slightly different colors based on the way that the masks interact. This one is this layer here, this mountain layer. Okay. It exists, as you can see, over top of our bridge right there. And where the bridge becomes harder to see in view, this is where the start of our layer 2 enters view when we start to see this image. So of course, when we place a layer over top of it, it's going to look a bit jarring in regards to that. So typically how we deal with that jarring appearance is we can add filters over top of it. That's a big part of making composite images. We can make a much more accurate selections, which we'll talk about. And then the third thing we can do is we can add levels of vibrancy or adjustment or other adjustment layers that sort of darken and tweak the colors that exist in that space. If you were to ask me what I would do to this image, well, I think I'd probably take a overall white balance change, and I'd maybe bring up the heat on that slightly. And I would maybe, that would give again, we're making an application, in this case, an adjustment layer like white balance. And this white balance adjustment is then being applied to every image that it sees beneath it. So it's being applied to that little dock portion that we copied. It's being applied to the sky there, and it's being applied to the base layer, which is this bottom section here. And so we're taking this effect, and then we're essentially adding a warmth to our entire image, or the entire composition of our image. If I just wanted this white balance to apply to just this little dock portion that exists underneath of it, I could clip this layer to the layer beneath it. So the clipping function is this little diamond here. And let's do a far more egregious change so you can really see what this looks like. Yeah, there we go, perfect. So if we make this white balance change and we make it like maximum cooling in terms of the white balance, and we clip that layer to the layer beneath it, as you can see, this white balance effect is only affecting layer 2, or so rather layer 1, copy 1, the copied bridge portion here, which is very different than when it's interacting with the whole image, unclipped. It's interacting with every layer that exists beneath it. An important note about this too is when we move our white balance unclipped to, let's say, beneath our bridge copy, the top portion there, you can see that now this white balance change is affecting A, the background, okay? B, it's affecting our bridge portion here, but selectively, it's absolutely not affecting the layer 1, copy 1 that exists higher than it, basically above it, in the layer hierarchy. So what that means is, think of it in this order. We're going down this line. I'm presenting layer 1, copy 1 to you in its natural colors, okay? And then I'm presenting all layers beneath the white balance change to have the application of that white balance change. And then I'm seeing this little mountain here with the white balance applied, and I'm seeing the bottom dock portion with the white balance applied. So this layer order is really important, but I guess that sort of can indicate a couple reasons why, Jillian, your layer 1, copy 1 might be slightly different than the layers beneath it. So Elias said, I do not see the add layer mask button either. I can only see it if there is one layer. If I have 2 layers, it goes away. I'm actually not sure why this would be. I might have to look into this. It's possible that it doesn't show up because, actually, yeah, let's explore this right now. I think this is worth. Okay, so it doesn't show up. If I was actually, I'm kind of done with this image. We're going to go into the next one anyway, so we might as well do this. Let's go to back to manage mode. We can discard these changes. Let's go to our image of our flamingo here. And let's see. So if I open up our image in edit mode, and we have our layer 1 here, there's our mask button. We can mask it right there. So I guess what Elias is saying is you do not see this layer mask button here at all. Can I get a confirmation on that? Okay, great. Just checking. Thank you for doing that. Okay. Let's see here. How many layers can you have? You can have actually like it doesn't matter. You can have as many layers as you want. Again, because like whenever you're adding another layer, just take a sip of water. You're adding a lot of visual information to your file, so it might slow down the process of you interacting with it. But generally speaking, I've worked with documents with upwards of 30, 50 layers, so not a problem. How do you delete a layer? That's a great question. So I'm going to duplicate my layer 1. I'm going to duplicate it. We actually need to do this anyway because we're going to be interacting with this file quite a bit. So I'm going to duplicate. I'm actually going to duplicate it twice. And to delete a layer, you would click on the layer and highlight it that you want to delete, and you would just go down to the delete layer button, which exists beneath it in the layer adjustment layers, just underneath the adjustment layers panel, which is this little trash bin here. And that will essentially remove it from view. Just in the same way that duplicate layer duplicates the layer, obviously, and masking the layer adds a layer mask to the active layer. Sharon asked, is there a way to make a version to preserve the original? Well, a version is kind of what the point of masking is, because it always preserves the original, right? Because at any point, if we've masked away this image, like, let's see here, let's brush on some black. And as you can see, I've sort of masked away portions of this image. At any point, I can say, well, I hate this mask. I want to get rid of it. Let's return it to its original state, which I can do a number of ways. I guess the first thing I could do is I could just right click on this mask and set the mask to white, okay? So that it shows all of the visual information, right? Or alternatively, what I could do is I could just remove the mask entirely, then removing the properties of whatever the mask tells the image to change. So I could just remove it by deleting the layer mask using this little X button that exists there. Okay, let's, you can undo delete layer mask. It's just down at the bottom here. There's also a history panel in regards to this, so you can see all those. I'm gonna transition back to what we're talking about. Let's talk about pixel targeting and how we can use pixel targeting as a method of selections, okay, to there inform our masks. So let's work with our first layer here. I'm gonna hide our other layers so we can see what we're doing. Let's go, I'm gonna rename this layer. Let's say this layer is going to be, yeah, let's rename it as orange. Okay, I'm gonna name this as blacks rather. And this one will just be master. That'll help. Let's go to our orange layer here. And then what we're gonna do is we're going to navigate to select and pixel targeting, and I'll explain this. So pixel targeting is fundamentally an excellent method of making very complicated selections. It, however, okay, is really most effective when you have a clear distinction of colors. In this case, we have very clearly, we have our flamingo here, which has these nice rosy salmon sort of tangerine colors in combination with very crisp black wing here. And then our background, which represents fairly gradients of blue in this case. And some of you might say, okay, Adam, let's take a step away from pixel targeting for a second. Well, yeah, you can get this selection fairly well by navigating to the magic wand selection tool. Okay, and maybe doing something like using I'll just make sure it's set to add to selection, and just clicking, in this case, the blue area, right? And I'll click this blue area down here, and I can make my selection that way. Let's invert that selection. Oh, actually, this is a really good point. Okay, so I've selected the background, but what I actually want is the foreground, or which is in this case the flamingo. So when I go to mask our image, when I click that mask button right there on clicking on our orange layer, what you'll see is that's everything but our subject. So all we need to do is we basically need to take that mask, and we need to make the areas that are white black, and to make the areas that are black white. So I would just click the invert button, and that would apply that change. What you may see though is if we were to, I'm going to add a base layer. So I'm going to add a blank layer, and I'm going to place it at the bottom of our hierarchy. I'm just going to fill it with, let's say fill it with blue. What you may see is that there's some fuzziness that exists on the edge of our image. And depending on how accurate we want to be, we may want to avoid this. Pixel targeting is going to represent a really clean way to get rid of this fuzziness that exists on the edge of our image. So let's illustrate to you how that works and show it. But yeah, that was in essence the magic wand tool. One of the limitations of the magic wand tool is that if there is more, essentially more gradations in colors, so there's way more colors in your image, you might find that it's more difficult to get accurate selections with the magic wand tool. You might find that it might be better to use the brush selection tool, which we'll discuss in a bit, or like I'm showing you right now, using the pixel targeting tool. So I'm gonna get rid of this mask. We don't need it. We're gonna make a new one. Once again, selecting our orange layer here, I'm going to go to select and pixel targeting. And let's do this, okay? I'm gonna min out, I'm gonna basically make all of these colors 0. But I'm gonna keep the tones set to 100 for everything because we wanna include all of the differentiations in tones, okay? In essence, brightness. But I only wanna include a couple colors because the thing I wanna select is actually the bird. So what I'm going to do is, well, what colors are the bird? Well, the bird is kind of red, it's kind of orange, maybe there's some pink areas here. So let's increase those sliders to make that selection. So I'm going to increase red. Okay, so we got a bit of the legs in here. You can start to see that selected by where the overlay is. Let's increase the orange. Well, our bird is primarily hues of orange, so that's good. That's a good selection. And then let's increase the yellows, say, just to catch any lasting effects. And actually, let's take a look at pinks too. I don't think pink is going to make any change. No, it isn't. So there's essentially no pink in this image is what it's saying. Now, if I was to pull up blue, for example, so we can min these out, that would select softly the background. And I can increase the other blue to target everything else. But we don't want that. We actually just want these 2 sliders, or 3 sliders rather here. So with that applied, I'm going to hit OK. And so it, in essence, makes that selection for us. But what we still need to do is mask that selection based on the criteria that we've added using pixel targeting. So I'm going to select the orange tool here, and I'm going to select Add Layer Mask. And if we deselect our active selection, you're going to see a couple things show up. Obviously, in this case, we're missing some of the wing part here, but we're going to make another selection to illustrate that. But we're getting there. We're going to make a blacks selection, and we're going to fill in some of the areas that were white on our bird here to really tweak it. But what's worthy and what's really important to note is that there's no fuzziness that appears along the edge of our subject here, being that flamingo. So let's finish this image. Let's tweak it a bit. Yeah. So I'm going to select this blacks layer. I'm going to turn it on. And then let's make a brush selection for this area of our image in addition to this area of our image. We, in essence, are going to be combining two selected portions to get a full image here. So I'm going to go in, and with our second image, okay, the blacks portion selected, I'm going to choose the brush selection tool, okay, and we're going to start brushing on using the smart brushing, or say the magic method. So magic brushing tool. Turned off, a brush selection is just whatever your nib width is, okay? So that's basically our selection. We can also reduce the feathering, so it's just selecting like that. We can increase the size of our selection. But when we turn on smart brushing, the selection itself changes. It's informed on not what the size or location of our cursor is, but actually what the content of our image, selected image, is. So let's unselect our background there. Let's turn on smart brushing. Okay. Let's turn down nib width and increase the feathering slightly, just until we're happy with our brush. And let's start to make a selection of the wing here. And as you can see, we're selecting just those black areas with our brush, and it's sort of ignoring, or rather it's going over portions of the image that are that like yellowy sort of pink tangerine color of the wing. This selection doesn't need to be that, it can be a little bit rougher, that's fine. What you might also notice though is that there's these sort of jagged edges that occur along the edge of the selection. And that's because in essence, we have the tolerance set quite low. So what tolerance is? So tolerance, you might not be able to see it with the naked eye, but there's lots of variations of black within this area. So as we go and select it, it's being quite limited in regards to the differences in black that it's selecting as we move our cursor along this image. Now, if we move the tolerance up, okay, you might see that these areas are now targetable, in essence, that we can start to add them to our selection. It's going to be less discriminatory in regards to these areas that are black. So in this case, we actually don't need that low of a tolerance. We can use a higher tolerance and get the same effect that we want. So I'm just going to go through, and I'm going to make sure that I select those portions and not the background. That would be best. Notice when I select over a different color. So if I take my cursor and I pull it left, it's going to select these portions. But then as soon as I move over it, right, there's a bit of a give period there where it says like, oh, you are no longer selecting black, you're actually selecting blue. So then I'm going to make that decision based on that change. So as long as the center of your cursor is within this area that you, within rather the tones or brightness of the color that you're looking to select, it will do a really good job. As a note too, by right-clicking on the area, you can stop selecting that section. So if I was to say right-click in here, I could undo that area. So a combination of both, I can undo that section there. And I'm just going to finalize this area selection. Perfect. Now let's go over to our beak here and select our beak. In addition to that, I want to include this area. And then what we'll do is we will add this selection and we'll mask it so that we can get this in our layer order as well. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay. Another thing to note too is selections take time. There's lots of different methods that can expedite it. Like obviously you use the pixel selection tool, but there's limitations in regards to each selection method. I already discussed some of the sort of limitations in regards to the magic wand tool. Because it's automatic, it doesn't necessarily know which, especially if you have an image with a great degree of variational color, which to include. The brush selection is actually a really good selection method, but it's manual. So you have to go through and you have to make that selection yourself. Pixel targeting is limited in regards to what overall pixels you can add to your image. And then using something like the polygonal selection tool, its limitation really comes into play when you don't have it, when you have an image that has lots of areas of like say something like hair. Hair would be really difficult to select with polygonal selection tool because there's just so many thin, wispy little lines. Whereas something like a building or a series of blocks or something like that would be very easy to select using polygonal selection tool. If a subject doesn't have hair or something like, or rather is wearing a hat, I often use a polygonal selection tool because it's just so accurate. So there's sort of methods of doing each. Okay, so we've made our selection of their beak and our black feathers. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mask that portion on our blacks layer here, the second layer, and that will add it there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to actually fill in the center of our bird here to color that area. And we're going to basically do this by clicking on the oranges layer. And with the mask highlighted, I'm going to set my brush to a white. So I'll reset the colors and I'll swap them. And I'm just going to delicately fill in the center here. And as you can see, this gives us really good control because we don't need to go over the edge of our subject, thus avoiding those fringes that we saw in the magic wand selected version of this this image. So we can go through and we can just really selectively really do a good job of highlighting our image. One of the nice things about this too is because our bird is, in this case, all this like salmon orange color, it gives us just like a really clean look. And I'm doing a bad job of this, but I'm going to go in and fix some of that. But I'm just going to go through and fill in this section here. This would be a really good method to do if your subject was wearing like a dress that you wanted to change the color of or something like that. You go in and you go, okay, well, I want to select just the red dress. And then I would go through and I would use something like the hue tool to alter that. And then as long as it's masked, what you could do is you could duplicate your base image so that only the layer that exists over top of it is the layer that's informing the color of the dress. So I'm just about done here. Again, avoiding the edges because the edges were all done automatically by pixel targeting, and they're doing a far better job than I could. Filling in our bird here. There's a couple sections I'd want to redo, but you get the gist of this. There you go. And I would obviously, again, I'm not going to do it right now, but I would go through and I would basically use a smaller nib width to clean up the legs. And that would be our image. But then, so the benefit of this is because of our background is so harsh, it's such a blue color, we're just way smoother in terms of the selection than we ever could be using something like the magic wand. So this is another method where, again, obviously I'd want to clean up the bottom section here, but this is a really, really good selection method. And we got that selection by utilizing pixel targeting. Okay. The method for hair is going to be the most complicated. I would use the brush selection tool. I would use it with, depending on your subject, I would do the fringes of the hair using a very low tolerance. See where that gets you. The reality is that hair is always going to be one of the hardest things to do an accurate selection of. This is part of the reason why you want to take hair photos, okay, using very neutral, very distinctive backgrounds. So the best photos you could take is of your subject that has like big, naturally curly hair, lots of action, lots going on. Make sure that that person is on a neutral background, white, you know, um, some sort of gray or like tan or taupe color or something like that. If you can work with that, right, that means that if you're going to be doing post production, selecting that person is going to be super, super easy because we can do something very similar to what we did here, which is we can select based on the color of the background. Okay, we can use that pixel targeting tool to select our background color and completely remove any of the manual aspect of this. So I would say that with hair, manual selections are never going to be ideal and they will take a great deal of time. However, well made, properly done photos will give lots of contrast to that between your subject and your background, and will allow you to make better, accurate selections. Yeah. So Andrea asked, we can rewatch this. Yes, it'll be on our YouTube page in a couple days, if not tomorrow. So Derek said, I use both Photoshop and ACDSee 2020, and I see the capabilities grow in ACDSee app. Yeah, I mean, we're trying to just update it all the time so that we are having stronger, especially when it comes to selection tools, which we're largely talking about now. Tutorial will be available on our YouTube page. Okay, I just have a couple more looks at some of these questions before we do our final little part of our workshop here. Norman asked, if you duplicate the layer, will it greatly increase file size? Do more layers increase the file sizes significantly? I don't want to necessarily agree with significantly, but duplicated layers will increase the file size. Every layer that you add, hard layer that you add to your layer order is going to increase the overall size of the file. It's not like, pardon me, it's not I wouldn't say it's additive though. If you're curious, like if you have a 7 megabyte file and you add another 7 megabyte file, it's not going to be a 14 megabyte file, but it does increase the file size. So if that answers your question. After adding an image as a layer, you have to click commit button and then add a mask button to come back. Yeah, this is a really good point. So whenever you add a layer, so if I go in and I add, let's add the sky layer, okay? I can add the sky layer to the base, to the top of our image here, right? I get this notification. So I have a hard interaction, and that hard interaction is, what do I want to do with this layer that I've added? You can just click away to a different layer, but it still has that commit discard layer button that exists right there, because our move tool is still active. When we're in our move tool, it wants to know basically, have you decided on a location for this image? Okay, and if so, yes, then let's commit this so that we can basically work on other things. So when you place an image, just make sure to either commit or discard it. Discard it will place it back to its original location, okay? And commit will then apply that image and ready it for basically revision. Yes. So yes, the answer to that. Right. So the reason why your delete layer might show up again is actually the same reason, is when you've added a layer. So when we're in this commit discard action, you may notice that we are not capable of deleting an image because we're still being asked to commit or discard the layer. So right now I'm not able to delete the layer, and the reason why is because essentially we haven't placed the layer technically yet. So it doesn't necessarily exist on our image yet. So I would either need to discard again or, pardon me, commit that layer. And actually, in retrospect, this is part of the reason probably where users were not seeing that mask come up. Yeah. Okay. So I am going to now focus on the pixel. So we've okay. So what have we talked about? Okay. So I've outlined layer order, why it matters. I've outlined placing a mask. We've talked about the differences between painting on an image and painting on a mask. Okay. We've talked about methods of selection. We've used the rectangle tool in the first example to make a selection. We've used the brush tool and the polygonal selection tool to tweak that selection. We've used feathering on a mask. We've reset masks using basically the invert tool, or also right-clicking and setting a mask as white or black. Now what I want to do is I want to focus on a larger, another image, and we're going to talk about this from an artistic perspective, like how to solve problems with selections. So I'm going to go into another image here and let's talk about it. So I have, so I guess what we're going to talk about, based on the fact we've also talked about pixel selections, let's talk about making a series of selection decisions based on our content. So I want to create this image. I'm going to zoom out slightly on this. I want to create this. I've basically taken this jet fighter plane, right? And I've put it in, there we go. I put it in our background here, which is a bunch of clouds. But there's a bunch of issues with this base layer, which we're going to talk about with this plane layer that we want to basically make an accurate selection of and then replicate. Let's go to that base layer now. But this is in effect what I would like to create with our image here. So our layer here, not a great background, super gray, sort of ugly looking background. I would like to input like some more robust clouds, something with a little bit more like detail and beauty to it. This just it's kind of like it's a beautiful picture of a plane, but it's just really not a great background. What I would like to do though is I would also like to notice that the head of the plane here, okay, this nose of the plane is going to be really, really brutal to make an accurate selection of. And the reason why is because this rotor is actually moving. You're starting to see motion in this in the sort of the prop of this plane. What we want to do is actually, to make an accurate selection of this area, we really need to use feathering. We're going to really use that. The rest of the plane is actually a very simple to make an accurate selection of. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the polygonal selection tool to make a selection of this image. I'm going to preview this because I've actually already made this selection myself. But how I would go about that is I would use or click the polygonal selection tool, and I would sort of like go through making a nice selection of the edge of our plane here, right? And then when I have that, and I can only do this in portions zoomed in. So what I would do is I would set my selection, make sure that it was I was using the add selection method, and I would just use the space bar to move about our plane to basically go through adding other portions of the plane in. When I finalize that, when I have my plane selected, what I can do is I can go to the select panel and I can save a selection. So I can save a selection with that selection in mind. I could save this as like plane 2 if I wanted to, and I'll hit OK. And what I can do is I can actually load that selection within this image. So if I go deselect and load selection, I have already made a selection, which is our first image here, but then I can bring that up using this load selection method. So let's bring up our actual selection, which looks like this, which took, I don't know, 3 minutes, but saves you guys time. Now, where the issue comes into play is with this propeller here. What I want to do is I want to duplicate this image a couple times because we need to make a good selection of this area. So let's talk about how to do that. But first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on our layer 1 here. I'm going to make a copy of it. And then let's mask the body of this. So I'll just rename this body. And let's name the layer above it. Let's name it prop. And let's mask out the prop now. Deselect that. Make sure that our second layer is selected. And let's do this selection. We're going to use the brush selection tool, and I think we might combine it with the polygonal selection. In fact, let's do that. I'm just going to go through and I'm going to use the polygonal selection to select the nose cone, which shape doesn't actually change at all. And when that selection is done, we will add a different selection method to this, which is the brush selection tool. So I can click on that and it actually won't get rid of our polygonal selection. We can simply just add another selection on top of this. And I'll make sure that the brush selection tool is active. And I actually want to probably really reduce our tolerance for this. You're going to see why momentarily. With smart brushing active, let's just start selecting this prop. And right now it's going to look kind of goofy. I'm going to admit it does look a bit silly with all this sort of jaggedness in the center of this. Let's just go through and let's make our propeller selections. And we're going to tweak the insides of this in a moment. The reason why I want to do this is because the inherent movement of the propeller, right? It sort of forces us to make a decision about how we want to mimic this effect. And the way we want to mimic this is by blurring it with something like feathering. Feathering is going to do a really good job of mimicking the motion of this propeller already. So I'm just going to go through and I'm just going to select, again, I want to capture as much of the sort of area that the propeller appears as possible. And that's looking fairly good. We want to clean this up in a second here, but maybe we just start with this and see what happens. Okay, yeah. Let's have a look. So if we mask this right now, okay, let's see what happens. So selecting our propeller layer, okay, with our active selection, which looks rough, I will admit. Let's go and add layer as a mask. And let's see what happens when we use the feathering tool to sort of blur this out. So right off the bat, you can see, hey, this looks super jagged and weird, but what is a propeller when it's moving? I mean, it looks very blurred. So when we bring up the feathering, we can sort of actually mimic that effect quite well. But what we could do to get a better job, and so we don't have to increase the feathering so much, is we can fill in the center of this. So with the propeller layer and the mask active, we're going to now use the brush, not the selection tool, to fill in the center of this. So I'm going to have my brush selected. I'm going to have white. And let's just go in and fill in the center of this area so that the feathering tool doesn't have to work so hard in this area. So let's do that. This one's the most egregious, I think. So let's get down here and fill in this area. And again, I can be sort of gentle with the outside. It doesn't have to be so strong because again, we're going to allow feathering to do its work. And then I'll select this one right here. Okay. And then when we go to feather this, yeah, we only need to increase it slightly. I would even say that this is maybe, yeah, I think we can even remove some of this slightly. There we go. So we zoom out again, we have a look at our image. Hey, that looks sort of closer to our base image, right? We're dealing with a complicated problem. The problem being that this propeller has inherent motion, which means that it doesn't have a defined line. So we're basically interacting with that as best we can. Let's add a white layer in the background to give us a feel for how we did. So if we do that and add white, it looks pretty good. The selection around the edge of the actual the wing over here definitely could use some work. I could clean it up over here as well, but overall I'd say it's pretty good. Especially when we go to actually add a cloud layer beneath it, a lot of this detail won't appear. So let's sort of do that. Let's add our cloud layer. I'm going to place it at the bottom of our layer panel by dragging and dropping. And we're going to start to address some of the actual issues with the selection. So I'm going to place it right about there. The first thing I'm going to do is I want to click on our body of our plane, this image right here, because this is the area of problem right here along the edge. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this FX tool. And I don't think I've actually spent much time talking about this in any of the workshops. So let's talk about it now. With this layer selected, let's hit Layer Effects. Layer effects is sort of a holdover from basically our font effects, but allows us to add inner glow, inner shadow, bevel, outline, blur, and shadow. And in the case of our image here, I think what would really benefit this image is actually just an inner glow that we've applied a degree of opacity to. And so what we want to do is, because this edge has such a hard sort of like appearance to it, we want to blend it in with the clouds. So we can use opacity in combination with inner glow to sort of effectively address some of this issue with this jaggedness. And the reason why we're able to do this is because the actual appearance of the background itself is quite quite bright. So let's use some of the tools here to sort of address this. I don't know if we need to have that thickness that thick, but we could definitely. Oh no, yeah, no, it looks a little bit better around here. Increase this. And as you can see, you can have multiple effects running at the same time. So if we wanted to actually add a shadow underneath this, we could. If we want to add like a blur to just the plane, we could. If we wanted to add an outline around the plane, which looks super silly, we could. If we wanted to bevel the edge of our plane, we could do so. But I think I'm happy with that. We're going to work with this a little bit more. This isn't done yet, but I'll hit close. So we have this FX that's running on this image that we can bring up at any point. Again, this is a non-destructive change to address that at any point by just clicking on the FX box. What would we want to do? I think in order to address some of the inherent sort of differences of light in this image too, I would always lean on doing some sort of effect over top of it. In this case, we might use something like a sepia effect because we want to give this like an old photo look. So what I could do is add a photo effect by clicking on the photo effect button just in the adjustment layers panel and navigate to sepia. And then I would probably address some of the color issues on that. I'd maybe want only half of the application on that. And I would also probably split tone this image as well. So we're going to add another layer effect. In this case, this split tone right here. And we'll probably make the highlights closer to yellow, or maybe like an orange highlight, and the shadows closer to a darker blue, like that. And right now it looks a bit silly because we still want to blend this properly. So let's take a look at some of the blending options. So with this split tone active, we could do something like a soft light interaction. We could do maybe like a hard light interaction, which changes the blending. We could do luminosity, which is actually really interesting looking. Could do something like pin light, which changed the light in the foreground here a little bit. We could just straight multiply it and you could really get a darkness and a lot of contrast out of it. But that looks sort of, looks junk, I think. So I think what we're going to do is we're actually going to go with the probably soft light, I would say, and with a slightly reduced opacity on it. And then so we have this kind of neat effect. Oh yeah, hard lights looks better. There we go. So you have this sort of neat effect where we've gone in and we've done our best to sort of merge the colors that exist within this image right here with some of the images, some of the background. And I fully admit that this is a composition, right? It's not like, this isn't intended to look like a like a masterful replication of this plane in the clouds or anything like that. But it's just supposed to represent like a kind of a fun and interesting way to incorporate an image and to address some of the inherent issues with sort of making selections. I'd probably go about adding a vignette to sort of finalize that file. So that sort of takes two different selection methods and a couple neat ways to sort of tweak the outline of your selection to better fit it and to mask it and to sort of address some inherent coloration issues within your photo. Yeah. Okay, so that's a lot. That's a ton. I think yeah, it's about an hour and 15 minutes. Um, I'm going to be posting this on YouTube. I would say at this point the workshop is effectively done, but I'd like to answer some questions because there's a fair amount that I wasn't able to get to. So for those of you that want to sign off, I would say a couple things. I would say if you have any questions that are complicated or something that we didn't talk about in the workshop today, shoot me an email. I'd love to answer them. I will as soon as I can. If you want to watch this video, it will be on our YouTube page on our playlist that is indicated by workshops. It'll be there probably tomorrow, if not the next day. And then finally, what I would suggest to you is I'm a designer. I'm a graphic designer. I'm a hobbyist. I worked for ACDSee for 4 years. But we have Alec Watson, who's a proper photographer, and he's doing workshops with me. And they're offered to our sort of our users that apply for our gold membership. So if you're interested in that, I put a link in the comments, which is to sign up for our gold workshops. Check that out. It is sort of like a premium service that we're offering through ACDSee. Yeah, let's tackle some more of these questions before we sign off. You can add a shadow to make the plane look more realistic. In this case, you could use the FX panel. We could, again, I mean, you'd have to really play around with it, but I would just add the shadow, massively reduce the blur. Oh my God, because having it so egregious like that doesn't really work. But actually, this is kind of an interesting method of dealing with some of the sharpness around the edge of that plane too, because it does give a little less of a, it's less jarring now with a bit of opacity. Maybe increasing the blur distance. You can really play around with that, and we can add a bunch of different layers or a bunch of different uh, FX in addition to that. Hey, thank you, Steve. Thanks for showing up. Yeah, so you can make shadows for sure. That's a part of the FX panel. Mervin, thank you. Jim, thank you so much. Yeah, please email me. Thank you, Norman. When is the next workshop? The next workshop is on the 11th of June. I think Alec will be showing up later to the end of that workshop. It's not a premium one. It's just general public. But yeah, please show up. It'll be fun. Thank you, Mauricio. Thank you, Andre. Thank you so much. Yeah, and hey, if my workshops help, like I'm really happy about that. And if, like I said, if you have any questions, just please shoot me an email. I'm happy to tackle that. If you have any suggestions for what you want to see in the product, please email me as well. I'll make sure that our developers get that information. Gert, can you explain split toning in a bit more depth? Sure. Let's split tone a different image. I'm going to go into this flamingo image right here. Split toning is super simple, okay? All it is it's a you're forcefully adding color in highlights and shadows. So we have our subject here, which is our flamingo. Let's click split toning on the adjustment layers panel. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Ralph. Thank you, Massimo. Thank you, Roxanne. When we add our split toning layer, okay, we can just crank the saturation of our highlights and our shadows. And we can input a color in those areas. So basically what split toning does is it says, okay, what color do you want in the highlights? And then adjust the color bar like this to produce a color in those highlights. It's important to know that highlights are not whites, and highlights are I guess rather shadows are not blacks. An image is comprised of whites, highlights, like I guess midtones, shadows, and blacks. And actually, this is referenced in the pixel targeting function, right? So blacks, highlights, or sorry, whites, highlights, and shadows. And then this is midtones, which is midtones will be the primarily what your image is composed of. But in essence, what we're doing is we're taking those and we're filling that information with a certain color. This is kind of more of an effect than it is anything else. And in fact, actually, I remember Alec talking about how he used this to get a comic book effect. What he would do is he'd take highlights and he'd make them like, give them a kind of like cyan appearance. and he would take like the backgrounds and give them like a purple appearance, and it would give this effect that sort of mimicked that of like Marvel movies, right? Obviously he would apply so with something like a bit of opacity, so it's not just like an egregious change. But when you apply a split toning with opacity, you can sort of forcefully change or interact with your highlights and your shadows in ways that other tools don't allow you to. So hopefully that answers your question, Gert. Please specify the exact URL to access the recording. I have not uploaded it to YouTube yet, so I do not have a URL for you as of this time. But if you go to our channel information that I've linked at the top, it is there. So you will find it there within the next 2 days. Promise. It'll be, if you go to videos, it will be the first one on the list, probably tomorrow or the next day. So thank you, Barry. Stoked to have you next time. Are gold workshops available to 365 users? I don't think they are. Gold is sort of like its own, it's just like additional content for tutorials, workshops, and a bunch of other things. There's a link to the gold like page where it shows it's an ACDSee ID function, which means it's like a part of our sign-in process. So when you sign in, you like log into the software, it'll show you what the features are. So check it out. It's in the link above. The only caveat is that you need to log into your ACD ID. What is your email address? My email address. Thank you, Rich. I appreciate it. Thank you, Donald. Yeah, it is a lot. I mean, like this is like one of, I think, the coolest functions about ACDSee is the addition of the layer panel as of 2000 and gosh, it was like one of the first things that they added when I started working at ACDSee. But layers are really cool because again, I'm a graphic designer. I make custom images using a bunch of different images, right? That's kind of what the fun of that is. It's sort of to be played around with. I mean, if you're like pardon me, if you're a actual like professional photographer, you maybe use a little bit of these functions every once in a while, but not ever in the sense that someone like a graphic designer would. But either way, masking is what we talked about today. No matter who you are, what you do, if you're the most starting apprentice style photographer to that of a seasoned professional who sells their photos for thousands and thousands of dollars, you're going to be using masking. Thank you, David. Hopefully this helped with that in terms of the concepts. And if it did, actually, yeah, shoot me an email. I'd really like to hear that. Rick, thank you so much for participating. Thank you, Ray. Saeed. Can you send me email invites for similar Zoom workshops in the future? Enjoyed today's lesson and found it helpful. Yeah, we do. If you sign up for our newsletter, we will, 100%. Ron, thank you. Joel, thank you as well. Okay, still got more questions to get through, so let's do it. Oh my God, everybody's. Odvin asked, do I use a drawing tablet for design? No. I know you can use a Wacom tablet in ACDSee, so it is compatible with that, but I've never used one. I'm kind of old school. I use a mouse. I even design with a mouse, which is like, real designers would poo-poo that, but I mean, that's what I'm used to. So, but tablets for sure, you can use it. Chris, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Guido, thank you. Are there any webinars for Video Studio? No, I mean, I did one and I really need to do more. So Jillian, that's something I will cover for sure. I will do a workshop of Video Studio. We have not produced a book. However, there is at the bottom of every page, let's just do this. If you go to our website and you go to a product, so say Ultimate, at the base of every page is a bunch of user information. So if we go down to the bottom here, there's a user guide. Okay, this user guide has a ton of information. It's huge. It's enormous. So that exists. So it's not a book per se, but it is a downloadable PDF that you can check out. Thank you, Bjorn. Thank you, Raymond. Awesome. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Rick. Oh my God, so many thank yous. Thank you, Gert. Okay, friends, thank you. Awesome. Thank you, Dave. And yes, the PDF is searchable, says Gary. That's awesome. Thanks, Larry. Thank you, John. Maybe off topic, but I just updated to 2020. How do I get the photo facial recognition over? This was very helpful. Oh, how do you use photo recognition? Um, okay, sure, we can talk about that. We're done the workshop. If you bring up a folder that has faces in it, basically, what you do is you go into view mode, which is kind of different from other modes. And it basically allows you to add facial data to people. So I've gone through and I have all these images with people's names in it, which basically get added to a repertoire. And so there is a chance for these to not work. But as you add photos of, so say your aunt. Okay, let's take your aunt as an example. When you start up ACDSee and you have no added face recognition info, you can go in and be like, okay, this is my aunt. Let's add. So you go like, you can go Aunt Emma, right? And then every image that looks like Aunt Emma is going to be flagged with either something that it's absolutely sure that's Emma, or it's flagged with a pending Emma um, information, or it's a flag. So, and it basically wants you to check or discard if that is or is not Emma. And when you add a new like images, when it flags you for new images and you say that is Emma, it adds more information to the repertoire and is actually better at looking for Emma next time. But that's a long answer to your question. The short answer is view mode. You want to make sure you have show face outlines turned on, okay? And then if you want to edit that information, this little box that exists next to the person's face, you click the face tool and it gives you the ability to add that information. Under, let's see here, if you go to tools and manage people, if you have a repertoire of people added, in this case we have Aaron, Aunt Emma, Dale, Haley, Nadia, Rebecca, etc. Okay, you can from there edit, remove these people, rename them, etc. So this is the facial recognition tool that was introduced last product release. Andrea, you're a very good teacher. Thank you very much. I'm sure you'll watch this tutorial. Yes, thank you. Link to the PDF. Sure, yeah, we can put a link in the user guide. Yeah, so everyone wants the user guide. I'll provide it. Okay, so if you go to ultimate page on the product page, and there's product documentation, which is the user guide, online help and user guide, and I will link you right to the ultimate one right now. So there it is. But you can always get to these from the website. 100%. Just go to whatever product you want. Okay. Facial rec does work pretty good. I would say, okay. So Bill asked, don't forget, Adam, before you end, can you quickly show me how to batch apply lens correction of a group of images? Oh, sure. Okay. Well, it's actually super simple. It's a develop mode thing, not an edit mode thing. What you would do is you would go into an image, okay, bring it up in develop mode. And there's a section under geometry, I think. Yeah, which is lens correction, okay? So you would enable lens profile, you would find your model, your camera model, okay? And then what you would do is you would, let's say that's your only develop mode preset that you want to change. Let's just save this preset, okay? So we have a lens, let's actually make one. Let's go lens correction. Let's say it's Epson, or no, I don't know, let's do Nikon. There we go. Makes more sense. Say I go with, I don't know, D300S. Okay, so that's done. It's been applied. And then it has my lens here. I would go in and I would save this preset, and under geometry, lens correction, I would check that box. Okay, just this box, and I would name this probably the make and model. It would make most sense to go Nikon D300S. And I would go okay. And then in manage mode, I would select all my images that I took with that camera, okay? I would go batch develop, and I would choose the preset that I just created, in this case, Nikon D300S. And then when I go to develop those changes, it will apply that develop preset to all of those images. So it's going to go through and it's going to create that profile for all of these images. Do keep in mind everything done in develop mode is non-destructive, so you can return these back to their original modes at any point. So that is how you do that. Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Bill. You're welcome. Super easy to do, actually, in retrospect. Okay, awesome. Wow, that's a long time. Thank you. Thank you to you, user. Claude, thank you. See you in June. Yeah. Okay. Facial works pretty good for large groups. Yeah. The only downside, I guess, to facial recognition is because it's still like a developing, there's still a lot to work on it in regards to. It definitely struggles more in groups. And honestly, this is sounds bad, but when developers, the amount of resources that developers have for people with darker skin complexion is actually really low. It just comes down to coding in general. Like there's way more resources that are available freely online for developers for pictures of people in this case that have like lighter complexion. So it definitely struggles a little bit, but we're definitely improving it with people that have a little bit darker complexion. Although it still does work. You have images that for sure it'll 100% see it. But I've noticed a little bit of difficulties, or at least a little bit of stumbling, moreover, with people that are have a little bit darker skin complexion, which sucks. But that's just a reality of actually developing a software in general. There's just more resources for lighter skinned people. Yeah. Gary said, is ACDSee going to create geometry interaction with camera body and lens combos like DxO does? Don't know. Send me an email and I will send it to our developers. And if they are, or maybe they'll consider it as a feature if they aren't. I did this in a previous. How do I do it again in 2020? I don't know what you're referring to, unfortunately. David, I guess I didn't hear it, but your answer. Oh, David, in terms to what we talked about today, okay, with edit mode, edit mode by its very nature will take a raw file, okay, and it will turn it into a JPEG. The only way to sort of functionally edit a raw file is in develop mode. But even then, it actually adds a sidecar file. When you take an image into edit mode, it's not gonna like destroy the original file, the raw file, or anything like that. You're not doing any destructive changes, but basically, in order to make an edit file, an editable a file in edit mode, you're going to have to save it down as a different file type, whether that's an ACDSee file, right? Or whether or not that's going to be like a JPEG file or something else. So it's not like you can open up a raw file in edit mode and then reproduce a raw file. That's not the way it works. So sorry, I don't know if that answers your question, but in essence, it sort of takes it in and it compresses it as a JPEG in order to reproduce those changes for you. Norm, thank you so much. I'm glad that cleared up a great deal of mystery. Live in a mystery. Can you do an automatic face blur when using facial recognition? Yes, you sure can. Wait, no. Wait, I don't know if you can. Hold on. No, I don't think you can, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. Yes, no, I don't think that is currently in the software, although I think that is something that they've considered for tools. Might have to. Yeah, no, I don't think you can blur faces. I'm not sure about that one. Maybe send me an email in regards to that one. Andrea, thank you. Does ACDSee Pro have the ability to apply a color profile based on taking a photo of including a passport target? Does ACDSee Pro, so professional, have the ability to apply a color profile based on taking a photo including a passport target? You're gonna have to shoot me an email in regards to that one, Dave. I'm not sure I understand. Can you have people send their picture with their name or facial recognition? ACDSee will recognize it, so I don't have to add it to the name, let's say. Oh, okay. This is kind of a complicated question, but so if you already have somebody in your database, or no, someone else. So someone else sends you a photo. The only way that would work is if your friend in this case also has ACDSee and is capable of tagging their image with a name. And then you could draw that information out of the file using embedded keywords, which is a complicated process. Well, not that complicated, but it's a process that I can't cover in depth right now. But this is technically possible, but because the way ACDSee works, face data, facial recognition, and face data is actually proprietary to the software. So if they don't have ACDSee, unfortunately, they can't add that information. You will have to do it manually. If they do have ACDSee, all they need to do is add that name and embed that ACDSee metadata. And then what you can do is you can draw forth that metadata by going to, I think, import. Is there a metadata import function? Yeah, import keywords from that metadata. Or rather, import ACDSee face data. So if they've added that, if their name is like, I don't know, they've taken a bunch of photos of your aunt and this is your uncle that also has ACDSee, and they say like Aunt Margaret, and then they embed those keywords, then upon receiving the files, need to just go to import ACDSee metadata, and then it'll go through and it'll add Aunt Margaret to basically your names. So when you go to manage people, Aunt Margaret will show up there. Long answer to a short question. Ted asks, can I convert photo to black and white and get an easier selection area than convert photo back to color? I mean, to remove the colors, I don't know if that would actually do what you want it to do because the contrast is still there. Contrast is probably the single greatest impact as to what makes selections harder or easier. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Greer. Again, thank you for hanging out and participating, especially in Bangkok. That's awesome. Thank you, Gord. Thank you, Gary. We've almost run. Oh yeah, we're run over an hour and a half now. I think I need to tighten this up here. Yeah, so I guess to answer Andrea's last question, and again, if I didn't get to your question, please shoot me an email. I will respond to it as soon as I can. But Andrea just said, I just realized that I'm using approximately 1/10 of the capacity of this software. Yeah, it's an ever growing and it's a huge software, and it applies a lot of different functionalities. You could only ever use this software for its development functions and be perfectly happy, right? You could only ever use this software for its management functionality, for the ability to add keywords and rate and find files appropriately, and you'd be happy. And if you're someone like me, you'd only ever use it for something like editing a file using layered functionalities, and you'd be happy. So I don't know, it just combines a lot of things, and I think people are slowly sort of learning that. ACDSee is not a young company; it's a 25-year-old company, but it's undergone a lot of changes over time, and we've also have we have a product that is sort of very similar to the way it looked when it started, which was as a digital asset manager. It's just adding those functionalities of develop mode and edit mode and really emboldening those things, which I think people are slowly realizing that this is a really, really, really useful tool. So yeah, I mean, it is cool. Okay. That's a lot of stuff, a lot of information. If I didn't answer your question, shoot me an email. Thank you all so much for participating. The next workshop, I believe, is on June 11th. We're going to be talking about, it's a really simple workshop. It's just going to be talking about what is vibrance, what is hue, what are things like contrast. We're going to be exploring each of those as terminologies and just trying to get rid of the jargon and actually explain why they are useful. So we're going to be talking about that. And as always, just sign up to our Gold if you're interested in more content with Alec. Take care, and I appreciate you all. Like I said, this will be on our YouTube in the next couple days. So.